On behalf of the Bar Debate Union, the Hannah Arendt Center, the Center for Civic Engagement, and the Bard West Point Exchange, I would like to welcome you all here to tonight's debate. We're really excited to see such a crowded room. You never know at Bard, things like this. My name is Ruth Zisman, and I'm the faculty advisor of the Bard Debate Union. The Bard Debate Union, for those of you who don't know anything about us, is a community of individuals committed to promoting the values of civic discourse, dialogue, and debate in the Bard College community through events like this, but also in the world at large. We do this in three main ways. We host public debates on campus, like the one you're about to see here tonight, and we're most honored when we have esteemed guests to join us. We also compete actively on the intercollegiate debate circuits, competing against colleges and universities from all over the United States and sometimes from all over the world. We do this 10 or 12 times a year. And lastly, we work with local middle schools and high schools to help integrate debate training into the area schools. So for any Bard students that are here that have never heard about the Bard Debate Union but would like to learn more, please come check out our weekly meetings on Monday nights in the Campus Center Red Room, or stop by any of our public debates on Wednesdays and Thursdays in Olin 303 at 7 p.m. The topic for tonight's debate, Resolved, Individualism is an American Value Worth Fighting For, is inspired by this year's Hannah Arendt Center conference, The Unmaking of Americans, Are There Still American Values Worth Fighting For?, which will take place this Thursday and Friday in Olin Hall. For those of you interested in attending who might not have had a chance to register online yet, you can just show up, but make sure you show up early as it's likely to be quite crowded, and the whole schedule is online at the Hannah Arendt Center website. Is America an exceptional nation? An indispensable nation? And if so, what makes it so? Are there ideals or values that we share? Equality, liberty, individualism? And has individualism as a guiding American value done more good or harm for American society, for the world at large? Is individualism an American value worth fighting for? It is with these questions in mind that we've come to tonight's debate topic. So please join me in thanking West Point for making the trip up to Bard to have this debate with us tonight. Hannah Arendt Center and Professor Roger Berkowitz, all of the debaters from West Point and Major Adam Scher, the Bar Debate Union debaters, as well as our own Dean and Vice President of Civic Engagement and International Affairs, Jonathan Becker, for moderating the debate. And with that, I'd now like to turn things over to Dean Becker to open tonight's debate. Thank you.
I wanted to thank Ruth Zisman and David Register, who's here somewhere. There we are, sitting up front. For all the work they do for the Bard Debate Union. The last debate we had between Bard and West Point was in Eastern Correctional Facility last spring, where a very, very close debate, the Bard incarcerated Eastern Correctional Dean won a very tight decision. I prefer this format though. We have mixed teams, and I again want to thank the cadets and Major Sheriff for coming here tonight. We've had a relationship with West Point for about a decade now, and several different formats for debates. I think this is the best one where we have faculty, students, cadets, all mixed together. We look forward to a great evening. The topic, as Ruth said, is Resolved, Individualism is an American value worth fighting for. I'm going to first introduce the teams. Affirming the resolution, starting at the far right, is Roger Berkowitz from Bard College Arendt Center, who's responsible, by the way, for just a really amazing conference. I hope people take advantage of the Unmaking of Americans. It's really, really great speakers. And a fantastic lineup, and it promises to be an excellent couple of days. Moving one over is Aaron Spickel from West Point, Theo Lipsky from West Point, and Andres Montanix from Bard. Negating the resolution Starting on the far side is Stephanie Presch from Bard, Jackie Merrill from Bard, Will Oakley from West Point, and Major Cher from West Point. So before we get, I want to applaud everyone. Now you're not forced to be silent during this. You can, without being excessive, groan, stand, be dismayed. It's meant to be a more festive event than a normal state Bard lecture, so people won't take offense to a point. As far as the format is concerned, each person is meant to speak for roughly 6 minutes. We'll show some, leniency tonight because there's so many exciting things to say. And after the debate, I'd encourage people to stay. So it's not going to be that long of, what is it, 8 times 6, 48. I passed my Q exam. It should be about an hour in all, so I'd encourage people to stay. After the debate, we're going to have question and answer. So you can actually ask the people, I think we should, I'm supposed to do the disclaimer that the views expressed tonight are not those of the U.S. Army or Bard College. Everyone is speaking for themselves tonight, and they may not even entirely believe what they're saying, but I hope they do. So you can ask in Q&A, you can really press people on the issues. The last formality is this. The tradition we have is to take a vote before and after the debate to see not what people think, but how many people have been persuaded. So with the help of David, who has better eyesight than I do, I am going to say, so the resolution again is resolved, individualism is an American value worth fighting for. So those people who are predisposed to believe that individual is an American value worth fighting for, please raise your hands now.
How many did you have? 14 and 8, 32.
They passed their Q exam too. So those predisposed against the notion that individualism is an American value worth fighting for, please raise your hands. So now you really have to stay the whole time. So we're beginning with the yeas at 32 and the nays at 27, and I think there's a number. Can we actually do the undecided right now? Those who did not raise their hands. Four. There's more people.
Now raise your hand twice, because I know there were at least 3.
All right, we'll just go ahead. Don't worry. Before I introduce our first speaker, I did want to, since just a little footnote to this. Since Ruth, when she was describing the conference and the thing here, I have to just add one editorial comment that she mentioned, is America the indispensable nation? A term which President Obama used last week, which was coined during the Clinton administration and used frequently by Madeleine Albright. I just want to make it worth noting that James Chase, who was a Bard professor, who passed away exactly 10 years tomorrow, was the person who coined this term. And it has many different nuances and meanings, and I think it very well worth noting. James was a managing editor of Foreign Affairs. He was the founder of the Bard Globalization and International Affairs program in New York, and author of several books, including an award-winning one on Atchison. I think it's really worth mentioning him because he was a great force at Bard and a really amazing thinker. And I think you'd be very happy that this conference is taking place tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, that this debate is taking place tonight. Without further ado, we're going to turn to Roger Berkowitz, who will defend the resolution.
So the resolution is individualism is an American value worth fighting for, which means we're supposed to decide, yay or nay, if it is, and you already voted. Some people would say yes, of course individualism is a value worth fighting for. It's self-reliance, it's independence, it's what it means to be a good American. Others would say, of course not, it's selfish, it's self-involved, we really care more about egalitarianism. Before we decide the issue, we actually should usually want to know what individualism is. And so I want to begin by asking, what is individualism and why is it so associated with America? The word individualism actually is a fairly recent word. Its first recorded usage was in 1827, so about 50 years after the founding of the United States of America, 51. And about 7 years before the French aristocrat Alexis de Tocqueville traveled to America and then wrote his famous book, Democracy in America. In that book, Tocqueville gives the second recorded use of the word individualism and attempts to define it. And he says that we can only understand individualism in contradistinction to selfishness. Selfishness, he said, is passionate and exaggerated self-love. It is the idea that the world revolves around you and that I am the most important person or thing in the world. Individualism is not a passion, it's a reflective and peaceable feeling to isolate oneself from society. It's to withdraw to one side with one's families and friends. It's to create a little society, to abandon society at large. In a sense, to almost create a cocoon for yourself, maybe with your family, or your friends, or your business. If selfishness is born of a blind instinct, a vice of the heart, I want passion to care about myself, individualism, Tocqueville says, is born of an erroneous judgment, a defect of the mind. What he means by that is that the vice of individualism is deeply connected to democracy. In an aristocracy, he says, and he's an old aristocrat, I am a member of a family, an estate, or a class. I know who my ancestors are, my religion, my family. I must sacrifice my own personal feelings and my personal enjoyments to the web of relations that define who I am in a class and a place in the world. In a democracy, it's very different. All men are equalized. We have less of a bond to a family or to a class. We are one man. We are, in a sense, not connected to a particular place. We're connected to all of humanity, he says. And thus, the personal bonds that connect us to individuals are loosened, and we become our own person, namely individualism. What this helps us to see is that Tocqueville sees individualism as dangerous because it's democratic. It isolates, it pulls people apart, it pulls them away from aristocratic and moral and hierarchical institutions, and it places people beside one another without a common bond. It leads, he says, to a kind of public virtue of indifference. And that's the danger he understands democracy to pose to the world. Which doesn't mean he opposes democracy. It means that democracy for him is dangerous and needs to be thought through in how to, because he assumes the world will become more democratic, how do you avoid the dangers of democracy? And his answers, he has two basic answers. One is religion. He says that religion pulls people to a common center. It pulls them out of their individualism towards something beyond themselves, to a community or communal values, and thus away from themselves. And thus, it's no accident that he said, and it's been proven for the last 200 years, that America is the most religious country of any Western democracy. Over and over again, poll data and others have proven that. And that for him was one of the things that saved America from its individualism and the dangers of individualism. The other was free institutions. Namely that in America, individualism and equality are saved by the power of free institutions. That citizens as individuals who have their own opinions and are convinced of their freedom to decide issues, namely self-government, and that they can have local governments and be important in local governments, that no one governs them, that these individuals are free, and in being free, govern themselves and connect themselves to a wider democratic community. Thus, Americans have combated the individualism to which equality gives birth with freedom and religion, Tocqueville says, and they have defeated it. What this means is that for Tocqueville, individualism is not comprehensible without equality and without democracy. Individual emerges in the world with democracy. Individualism emerges in the world with equality. It's dangerous, but it can only be saved from those dangers because individualism also stands for the virtues of freedom, self-government, which reconnects us to the society which individualism often distances ourselves from. If we understand this correctly, what we see is that individualism and egalitarianism, or individualism and equality, are not actually opposed. They are connected in some sort of important, deeply bonded way. You can't have individualism without democracy. But democracy without individualism would also be incredibly dangerous and tyrannical. So, for Tocqueville, democracy in America is also individualism in America. Liberals today often stress the primacy of egalitarianism, which is one core American value of equality. Conservatives stress individualism and freedom. But do these two need to be opposed? Isn't there a way that we can, in some sense, bring individualism and egalitarianism together? Well, I'm suggesting that if we understand Tocqueville correctly, they have to go together, and both need the other. And we can see this through two examples, and I'll end with these two examples. One is through the civil rights struggle. Civil rights, progress was made in civil rights by showing that our institutions and attitudes were outrageously inegalitarian, thus leading to changes in laws, as well as programs of assistance to help remedy the effects of long-lasting inequality, namely to make people and enable people to be better individuals. Similarly, in welfare, few are opposed to helping the poor or needy. In fact, I don't know anyone in political life who is. Almost nobody, what people question is how. One view says we should pay people not to work, namely welfare. And another says we should pay people to work so that they become independent individuals in society, something called workfare. The point I'm trying to make is that individualism and egalitarianism go together. Individualism is a core American value. If we lose individualism, we lose equality, and we lose democracy. And thus, we need to fight to keep individualism as a core American value in our society. Thank you.
In 1912, when Woodrow Wilson was nominated at the Democratic Convention, he campaigned on a program called New Freedom that emphasized individualism and states' rights. Now, Woodrow Wilson was also a scholar and an avid reader of many of the philosophers that were mentioned by Professor Berkowitz. Now, he was such an avid admirer of these philosophies that it led him to decide that the democratic election in Mexico was actually a complete farce, that these Mexicans had failed to uphold the value of self-determination, and that we as Americans needed to invade in order to teach them how to elect good men. Now, you see, I bring up this example because what has fundamentally been missed so far is that this is not just about theories of individualism, but this is about how they have been actualized in American history and about how they have been upheld as American values. Now, I would also like to go on to a couple of points before I move on to the rest of my speech, as they will be further covered by my partners. In terms of this issue of civil rights has never been argued on the basis of individualism. Martin Luther King did not campaign for his own rights. He campaigned for the rights of all African Americans. Additionally, this emphasis on individualism really enforces the negative stereotypes surrounding individuals who get welfare in society. But moving on, as those will be covered by my partners as we go on. So, what Professor Berkowitz indicated to all of you is that individualism has a strong tradition within American society. But what I would like to present to you today is this other side of individualism, the other history that we have been missing. So this actually goes further beyond when Tocqueville was using the word individualism. But you see, in 1787, the Northwest Ordinance officially authorized the Northwest Territory for white settlement, completely ignoring the fact that there were Native Americans living in these lands. Now, this was a problem that persisted, particularly with Manifest Destiny, which encouraged American expansion across the continent on the basis of maximizing economic potential, with little regard for how this affected those who were already there. Now, this was further elucidated in the 1840 Mexican-American War. This is a particularly interesting example because not only does it demonstrate the way in which slavery was justified on economic grounds, but the way in which the United States didn't really care that the Texans were living in Mexico and openly flouting Mexican law. Instead, they took this as an opportunity to say that the Texans needed help to self-determine, and then the United States ended up taking 50% of what was then Mexico. You see, this also came about during the 1862 Homestead Act, which encouraged 600,000 families to settle west, giving 160 acres of land to each family for free on the basis, again, of maximizing their economic potential, further creating more clashes with the Native Americans that were incredibly bloody and violent and disregarded the rights that they had on that land. The United States followed previous models of rights to Native peoples that were extremely limited because, you see, individuals to the United States were not equal. Some individuals were in fact more individual than others. And this you can really see during the compromises surrounding slavery and surrounding how representation was first instituted in the United States, where African Americans were thought of as 3/5 of a person. Now, I'd also like to bring this into the present a little bit more and talk about how this has been emphasized through stand your ground laws. You see, this allows less restraint on the use of deadly force in self-defense. In fact, American individualism has become firmly defined by the right to bear arms and this right to use lethal violence. This has actually led to such problems surrounding the discussion of gun control that it's basically political suicide. In fact, American individualism has become so defined by these guns and these gun laws that those who advocate for gun control are accused of not being real Americans. In fact, this was actually very interestingly elucidated by Ted Nugent when he said Massachusetts is not in America, that this ability to use violence to defend the individual was a fundamental American value, not too different from the same violence that was used by the white settlers to go after the Native Americans that were living in those lands. Now, what do I want to leave you with here today is the fact that this is fundamentally about how individualism has been used as an American value. We want to really focus on how this has been actualized, because that is how we should be judging this here today. When individuals are not regarded as entire individuals, when they're regarded as 3/5 of a person. You see, it was no coincidence that when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and John Adams was advocating that all men are created equal, that his wife reminded him, albeit a little bit not too gently, that he should remember the ladies. Thank you.
I want to first begin by thanking Bard College for hosting myself and my colleagues. I've gotten the excellent opportunity to debate Bard in plenty of instances in the past. It's always enjoyable, but this is my first visit, and the hospitality they've shown us is really great. I also want to reiterate that the views that I will express and my partners don't necessarily reflect the Academy or the U.S. Army. So that being said, the affirmative would once again like to assert the importance of American individualism and that it is indeed a value worth fighting for. In contrast to the manner in which the negative wants to portray us, this stance is one which is at the heart of the preservation of human freedom. As Dr. Berkowitz previously articulated, we need to protect the dignity of individual conscience against the tyranny of the majority. The conviction that consensus is no substitute for right is at the heart of the American democratic experiment and has led us to enshrine our individual rights in a Constitution and Bill of Rights which is not easily manipulated by a mere majority. The affirmative will continue to defend that the essence of American individualism is in the right to choose for oneself the moral good and to possess the autonomy to act in accordance with those principles in order to further the egalitarianism and temperate democracy in the manner that Dr. Berkowitz was articulating. Now, the negative, however, wants to portray a very different conception of what individualism means by showing how it has been actualized in American history. They claim that the American individualism has been at the heart of gross injustices committed by both the citizens and the government of the United States. While the affirmative will not attempt to excuse these actions, it will attempt to show that these were not the product of American individualism, but in fact an extreme betrayal of those individualistic principles. For instance, the negative laments the atrocities associated with westward expansion, highlighting the Mexican-American War as a particular instance. The affirmative, however, is in line with the sentiment of Thoreau, who, watching a mass of soldiers march towards the Mexican War, lamented, quote, they have no doubt that it is a damnable business in which they are concerned. They are all peaceably inclined. Now what are they? Men at all? Or small movable forts and magazines at the service of some unscrupulous man in power? The mass of men serve the state thus, not as men merely, but as machines. Our argument is that it was not a nation of individuals which made possible such brutal acts as the conquest of Mexico, that it was not particular Americans who had a design to go and deprive others of their livelihood and homes. Rather, it's been the amalgamation of these individuals into an unthinking corporate body, which we tend to call the government, and which, unchecked by individualism, has led to some of the worst atrocities. It is only because of the failure of American individualism, of individual American men and women like myself and yourselves, no different than ourselves, who surrendered their individuality for the benefits of so-called social cohesion so that they could be used like cogs in a machine, which made tragedies like the conquest of Mexico possible. Even today, we can see that our most jingoistic impulses do not derive from individualistic sentiment, but from the herd mentality of the group. Part of the tragedy of September 11th lies not only in the irreparable loss of life on that day, but on the grave moral failure that led us to engage in a nebulous and amorphous war on terrorism, which has implicated the United States in violence across the globe. While the feeling of group solidarity at the time made the decisions of that era seem compelling and just, these feelings overwhelmed the better reason of many American citizens. In our own Congress, no starker example exists than that of Representative Barbara Lee, the sole dissenting vote against the authorization of the use of military force for the war on terrorism, who had the courage to stand up alone and boldly say, quote, as we act, let us not become the evil we deplore. When the affirmative speaks of individualism, and the necessity of prioritizing the preservation of individual conscience, it is citizens like Barbara Lee who we are talking about, not gun owners and individuals like Ted Nugent. This is not to say that the United States will remain immobile when once free peoples are threatened with tyranny. Coeval with the commitment to respect for individual rights at home, its responsibility to preserve those societies where individual rights are already protected but are under threat from outside coercion. While the affirmative will not defend the idea that autonomy can be given from one group of people to another, a concept which itself should strike us as a contradiction, we will gladly defend that the existence of individual rights is no excusal from all responsibility to help preserve those rights in the world at large. In the next speech, the negative will likely stand up and articulate that the nation conceived as an individual leads to an unthinking and unfeeling concern with ourselves. As the affirmative, we wish only to remind you that there are vast and distinct and important differences between groups of people across the globe, and that a respect for these differences is probably better for preserving peace than a kind of false veneer of similarity. In the end, as regards the relation of individualism to how the United States should interact with the world, we would like to emphasize the quote of our former president, John Quincy Adams, who warned so long ago, quote, that by once enlisting under other banners than her own, were they even the banners of foreign independence, she would involve herself beyond the power of extrication in all the wars of intrigue and individual avarice, envy, and ambition, which assume the colors and usurp the standard of freedom. She might become the dictatress of the world. She would be no longer the ruler of her own spirit. Only the value of American individualism can help temper that the call to engage in those kinds of actions. Thank you.
So, the other side stood up here and said that individualism is at the heart of human freedom. And this is an interesting concept, I think, when looking at the history of the United States and looking at the history of the term individual in the United States and connecting it to this idea of freedom. Now, the other side has said that individualism protects us from majority rule and protects the individual rights that are inherent in man. However, I think that most important moments in American history, including the civil rights movement, as Professor Berkowitz brought up, were collective movements. Not the movement of one man protecting his rights, but a collective movement of people in a disenfranchised group coming together and fighting the oppressor group. And so, today I want to, my main sort of extension to my partner's speech is that the idea of individualism in the United States is rooted in the idea of one individual making money off the expense of other individuals. And this is something that I think began when the United States was founded, when looking at the individual as the white man, as someone who has the right and the right to his property that consists of other human beings. This individual has the right to his property because that brings him profits. And I think that this is something that is actually at the heart of what we look at when we talk about individuals in this country. So who is the individual in American thought? It's someone who's profiting over the oppressed other group. But what is the rights that this individual has? It's their rights to have this property over other people. And how does this focus on the individual cloud the realities of economic inequality in this country? When we're looking at the United States and looking at issues of poverty in the United States, there's a common rhetoric of holding the poor accountable for their situation. If you're poor, it's either said you didn't work hard enough, you didn't go to school long enough, perhaps you decided to start a family too soon. These things are individualizing systemic reasons why poverty exists at such an extreme level in this country. And by individualizing poverty, we make it incapable for groups to come together and realize collective oppression and to overcome these systems of power in this country. But working through this for a second. Now, this focus on the individual is really sort of exemplified in our obsession with the American dream, that if you come to this country and if you work really hard, you can get rich, and then you can move to the suburbs away from your horrible job, and then you can put a fence around your property to keep everyone else out. This idea, the other side will come up here today and say this is central for us protecting our property rights, this is essential for us sort of sticking up to our own individual rights, but this is really much more of an idea of me carving out a piece of my land, I don't care whose land it was before, but carving out a piece of my land, saying that it's mine, and then saying that other people can't have any rights to this. It's setting up a system where once you get this property, it's no longer other people's property. And this is perpetuated in a country where the top 1% owns 90% of the wealth in this country. And as we keep on pushing our economic ideologies onto other countries in this world, we've set up a system where the wealthiest 85 people in this world own own as much wealth as one half of the bottom of humanity. Individualism is not a right, is not something that we should be fighting for in this country, because in its roots, in its origins, it's about making money on the expense of others. It's a system that isn't about me standing up for my own rights, it's about me taking away other people's rights so that I can make a buck. This is not a right that I don't think that we should be fighting for, it's a right that we should be distancing ourselves as much as possible. Because as I said at the beginning of our speech, the best moments in American history haven't been individuals, it's been collective movements rejecting the oppressor and coming together in a social movement. Thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. So first I'd like to reiterate the necessary disclaimer that Cadet Spickle made at the beginning of his speech, that these comments don't reflect the views of the federal government or the Army or the Academy or my mom or anything like that. This is strictly for this debate. The affirmative has thus far forwarded two distinct planks of our pro-individualism platform. Professor Berkowitz opened with an explanation of how individuality is instrumental in staving off tyranny and highlighted its twin relationship with egalitarianism. Cadet Spickle highlighted individualism's central role in checking criminal foreign policy. I will be speaking on the role of individualism in bettering the American legal system and responding to some of the comments that we just heard from the negative. Though the American value of individualism precedes the writing of our national constitution, even if, as Professor Berkowitz pointed out, the word wasn't used until after its writing, this document and its ensuing amendments best capture our law's commitment to the inherent rights and freedoms of the individual. The 14th Amendment, which guarantees these individual rights to all citizens despite any group membership, has proven the most effective weapon against racist, sexist, and homophobic institutions in our society. Under the amendment, Brown v. Board stipulated that individuals have the right to attend schools regardless of their racial grouping. Gideon v. Wainwright afforded the individual right to legal counsel regardless of their economic standing. Roe v. Wade protected the individual woman's right to her body. And Lawrence v. Texas defended the gay population of America's right to their own sexuality. The negative may respond, and has actually already responded, with a litany of examples where the American legal system has failed abysmally. Indeed, even a cursory review of headlines today reveals there to be deep, lingering imperfections in the American legal system. No one in this debate is saying that any of the aforementioned Supreme Court decisions are a cure-all that together have cleansed our society of latent oppression. That'd be ridiculous. Stories like the killing of Michael Brown remind us every day of these imperfections. That said, though these stories indict the legal system, they do not serve as indicts of the individualism upon which the legal system was predicated. Rather, these miscarriages of justice persist, despite the premium we place on individualism. The affirmative argues that the more we apply the principles of individual right and freedom, the fewer black people are gunned down in the street, the more the gay rights movement will succeed, and so on. One individual right less explicitly outlined in the Constitution, but still central to our legal system, is the individual's right to property. The negative tried to frame the individual's right to property's birth as the result of a profit motive, when in fact, those who first articulated the importance of the right to property talked about how the right to your own private property is absolutely essential in staving off oppression. That was why property rights are important, not profit. The affirmative posits that there is no more effective means of marginalizing a population than by depriving them of their individual right to property. Property rights, the ability to distinguish what you own as yours in the court of law, serves as the foundation for any economic activity. If you cannot distinguish what is yours, you cannot receive loans owing to lack of credibility, you cannot invest capital that you do own, you cannot move capital in any direction in order to better your life or those lives of your loved ones. You are relegated to wage labor, and all that you rely on is vulnerable to seizure by hostile parties because you cannot possibly stake it as yours. These are the arguments of Fernando de Soto, an economist that has done significant work in the recent decades to demonstrate that the more societies protect individual rights in a legal capacity to property, that is, the greater education flowers in that country, the greater economic mobility is in that country, the greater democratic participation rate. The poor of the world remain so despite the fact that they sit on, per the work of De Soto and his team of economists, trillions of dollars in untitled property. The negative has tried to frame property rights, and specifically property rights as they relate to land, as something that people do without regard to whose land that originally was, when in fact, had people like the Native Americans enjoyed property rights in a legal capacity, they would have been able to resist westward expansion. It is their silence in the legal world and in the realm of Western law that allow that expansion to occur. Property rights gives them a voice. That is why America's founding thinkers believe property rights to be so important. Critics of American individualism and American society writ large also, and the negative has outlined these arguments, scoff at the idea that these values and these rights could protect the poor. I've already given you one reason. One need only wave around a copy of Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century to communicate the point that there exists increasing and thus increasingly problematic wealth disparities in our country. There are several levels to our reply. The first I've already outlined with that conversation of property rights. Secondly, though wealth disparity is a serious concern, the affirmative would argue worse than disparity is absolute extreme poverty. There perhaps are no more marginalized populations than those who cannot speak in the slums across the world. The nations where one sees this sort of debilitating property are those, not coincidentally, that rank among the lowest 10 on the Property Rights Index: Haiti, Burundi, Bangladesh, Cote d'Ivoire, and others like it. A prerequisite step to any alleviation of disparity is the elevation of our poorest from absolute poverty, and only individual rights permits that. Secondly, the imbalanced political power which impedes upward mobility in the United States is not the result of individualism. The preponderance of influence among the wealthiest Americans and the wealthiest of the world is instead the result of a perverse protection of corporate interests contrary to the tenets of individualism. Decisions like Citizens United privilege corporations, groups, and over the votes of individuals. This subordination of individual political agency to corporate power is as much a transgression of individualism as anything else. Now, one last point I'd like to address from the negative is the point that collective movements are in fact those which mark the greatest moments in our country's history. But individualism does not preclude collective movements, and when we in fact take a closer look at those collective movements which the negative has highlighted, we realize that those collective movements mobilized in reaction to systems of oppression that disregarded individualism. There's perhaps no greater affront to individualism than Jim Crow, than slavery. And just because a collective movement reacted to that in order to change that and reinforce the values of individualism present in our legal system does not mean that individualism cannot serve the oppressed. With that, I close my remarks a little bit.
Good evening, everybody. For the third time, I'd just like to reiterate that everything I'm about to say is not in any way a reflection of the Army values, the values of the Academy, or the federal government. This is just me talking to you. So, anyway, we tend to focus on the role of the individual in all its glory without really considering the other side of the coin. Obviously, that's the whole point of what we're talking about tonight. But I'm going to just make this claim that individualism is a root cause of selfish attitudes which pervade social policymaking to the detriment of the United States. So you heard one of my partners briefly touch on the negative social impacts that individualism can have on creating poverty and otherwise wealth disparity in the United States. So I think the best way to compare American individualism with the other options out there is when comparing with Britain and France and some other countries where individualism isn't as much of a norm. So I think the best symptom of the negative impact on American society lies in the failure of our social welfare system. So in Britain, every single citizen enjoys the benefits of the National Health Service from cradle to grave. They never have to worry about not being able to afford health care. The French are known for their welfare state as well. They provide for homeless people's housing. They provide, educational funding for their students who can't afford to pay for college. Maybe there's some questions about the sustainability of this model, but at the same time, homelessness and poverty is a lot less pervasive over there than it is over here. If you compare these examples to the United States, the founding implementation of Obama's healthcare policy and reform is a reminder of the costs accrued by individualism. Every year, healthcare costs continue to rise. Millions of Americans are forced to go without crucial procedures and operations. The multi-trillion-dollar pharmaceutical industry is really just a private industry designed to make a ton of money at the expense of Americans as a whole. And so because they privilege profit over physical health, the physical health of human beings, that's why you're going to see that individualism really has quite a dark side, because this capitalist spirit, this me over the rights and the interests of the group as a whole, that's really bringing us down as a society. You see the same thing with the housing market, with a few dismal exceptions. It's mostly capitalistic. Prices are skyrocketing. It's evident on the streets of our cities where you can't really walk even a block without seeing people panhandling, you're seeing homeless people. And you realize that this is a huge problem here. The same thing applies for infrastructure. This we don't build our roads out of asphalt because it's the best material to build them out of. We build them out of asphalt because it's the cheapest and it keeps construction companies in business. Same thing we see with trains. Our railway networks are far more inefficient and regional than those in Europe. You only have to look at Eurail or the TGV in France to see what it could be if we had a more collective spirit. Instead, we were insular and corporate-minded and focused on profits for small groups of people and even just singular people at the head of these large corporations. So, rather than providing for the good of the whole, American businesses continue to raise prices even though demand is at unprecedented levels. They see people's need not as a chance to help those people, but as just another chance to profit. We're so focused on individual growth, individual success, individual responsibility that we've forgotten about all those who cannot grow or succeed on their own. John Rawls, as a philosopher, wrote that social policy should be designed to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society. And so in our individualistic outlook, we fall far short of that metric. We base our decisions in cynical utilitarian calculus that benefit the privileged and disregard any considerations for those in need. I don't think it really says very much good about us as a nation when we export billions and billions of dollars of money and aid to the third world when our own people live in similar, if not worse, conditions. So the purpose of the speech isn't for me to decry the United States for its ability to provide for its populace, but to challenge us to change. I love this country. I just signed up for another 10 years to defend it, and it's not. All I'm saying is that I sincerely believe that the first step forward towards fixing our own social issues is to step away from individualism with our mindset, right? So I'm not naive enough to really believe that this just personal rejection of individualism is going to cause change tomorrow. Like, I get that, right? We sort of have this paradigm, this capitalist paradigm, this paradigm where it's like, you're responsible for your own action and development and you do your own thing, and that's fine. But if you take a step back and try to just take a more collective mindset, influence those around you day by day, as we go forward, I think that'll probably, hopefully, be the first step towards a more collective, less individualized American identity. So, in that way we can be more conscientious and sort of provide for others besides ourselves. So at this point, I'm going to move on, just respond to a couple things that my good friend Theo just said. Talking about how property rights are going to stave off oppression. I don't really think that's true, especially because if you consider property rights as a collective universal right, oppression then would be the work of individuals who disregard those universal natural laws. So, and not, as he said. Furthermore, the political power of elites in our country isn't corporatist, but it's exceptionalism and it's individualistic exceptionalism. So corporations they're made up of a very few people rising above the hard work of others and pushing themselves up on that. So finally, all the social cases that he cited were cases stemming from large, widespread collective social movements, not from individuals. So I think those are just a few reasons why you're going to see that American individualism is not something worth fighting for.
In the spirit of American tradition and American history, I think it's only right that we turn to Jewish German Marxism for the answer. I think all the problems that we're pointing out on the other side, there are problems with selfish groups of people, one group fighting for the other side. So if we actually look at the psychology, the psychoanalysis of people whose job it is to investigate groups. Let's look at Otto Kernbach, a German Marxist sociologist, who looked at how groups really fundamentally function. And he said that group processes in general pose a basic threat to personal identity, a threat linked to the proclivity in group situations for primitive psychological levels to be activated, including primitive object relations, primitive defense operations, and primitive aggression. So what we see here is that the individual isn't the problem. The problem is large amounts of groups that do dangerous things. These are narcissistic groups, not individuals. So these are groups that love themselves and love what they do. We see nationalism, corporatism, racism, patriotism, ideology, all these things are large groups of people who justify themselves. They look around and say, yeah, we're right, right? And then they go out and do terrible things. So what is narcissism actually? It's a lack of deep conviction regarding one's own values, and it involves the need for constant assurance. It makes individuals easy to go along with another group simply so they can feel better about themselves. This is the psychoanalysis and this is the psychology of Marxism. These groups that are conventionally ideological, ideologically simplistic, conformist, and able to indulge themselves without guilt or gratitude, and they lack a sense of personal responsibility or deep investment of others. And I want to take that last phrase and look at America today. Does America need more individualism, or do we need more groups that are ideologically simplistic, conformist, and lacking a sense of personal responsibility and deep investment in others? So we want to look at three things today. Three versions of the modern manifestations of narcissistic mass culture. First, the rationalization of the entire scope of the human world. Second, the reduction of meaningful discourse in all forms of media and conversation. And finally, the social, cultural, and emotional alienation. I didn't think Marxism would be relevant in a debate about American individualism, but surprise. So, first off, what are we looking at? What are the definitions of today's depersonalization, of today's non-individualistic culture? Sociologist Pierre Bourdieu has a wonderful explanation that life is cut off from its antecedent and its consequences. So without looking at the true individual, at the entire history of a person, at the history of that person's culture, background, upbringing, education, and their personal agency to do things in the future, that's the lack of individualism. Looking at a certain person, not as a person, but whatever you immediately want from them. So this person is dehistoricized and removed from their fundamental individuality. So first, let's look at rationalization. We have the idea of standardized tests everywhere, education, Common Core. We have the idea that we can just measure everybody and everything and be right. We can measure every single part of a person, reduce them to a statistic, and that's the way that the future is going to go forward. I don't think anyone in this room agrees that that is the correct way to go about education, society, even getting a job. To be a waiter, you can take a spatial awareness test, which is actually done in your result is calculated statistically. To be a waiter. So if we're going to run our entire society off of statistics and tests, I don't think that's individualism, and I don't think that's a good thing. Look at over-medicalization. Right now, if you have a problem, it's in the DSM. We're up to the DSM-5 because the objective catalog of what constitutes a mental illness keeps changing, apparently, because they're so true. So when you go to the doctor and they tell you you're anxious, you're depressed, they don't ask you, why are you anxious? What happened to you as a child? How do you feel? What are you going to do tomorrow? No, take some Xanax, go home, be happy, get back in the workforce. That's not individualism. That is corporatism and elitism and not taking account of the individual in any sense. Let's look at bureaucracy and legality across the board. Mass incarceration is viewed as a statistic, not a human tragedy. We have mandatory minimums because that's going to solve crime. It's not working. We have stand your ground laws where it's just us, the good guys, against the bad guys. That's not how a legal system should work, and that's absolutely, as the affirmative side pointed out, this is precisely the lack of individualism, the not taking into account of the individual part of the legal system, of the fundamental philosophy of society, and it's precisely for this reason that we need to return to an individual conception of the legal individual. Second, let's look at the lack of discourse. We have sensationalism in news and politics. It's a wonderfully exciting story. Something's happening, these protests, tear gas, flags, and explosions, everything. What happened beforehand? What happened afterwards? We don't care about the people where that's happening. We care about the pretty pictures. It's fun to look at once and then you move on. Causes happen one time and then we move on. We don't care about the individuals behind these causes, and it's more fun to simply see the sensational aspect of a single instance which the media can simply pick and choose and put together as opposed to actually caring about any of the individuals involved in all these processes. So we look at, again, the immediate story. There's no background and there's no consequence. What happens after the protest? I get to see a really full, in-depth journalistic investigation of when the streets are cleared. I've never seen a cleanup effort after a protest on live television because that's not interesting and those are no longer people. Again, those are pictures to look at. Now we look at our American politics. We have gridlock of talking points and polarization. No one actually cares what the other side thinks, what they feel. They're just going to say what they believe really easily, very basically over and over again. No one's taking the human into account. Our political arguments
arguments have nothing to do with the actual people in them. It's just trumpeting who's right. It's not an argument, it's not a debate. Our politics are not working because we're not recognizing the people in them as individuals, nor are we recognizing the people they represent as individuals. The entire system is lacking individualism in a simply one talking point, a non-human talking point, going at another non-human talking point. Let's look at consumer monopolies. You get to just choose between, are you a Mac or are you a PC? Do you have an iPhone or an Android? This is how we define ourselves. There's no actual discourse in what does it mean to always be connected to technology. You just get to choose immediately, one after another. What product do you want? What things do you want? No one's actually caring what people are buying this, what happens with your old phone. No one cares about the individual consequences of any of these things. And finally, to look at the absolute decline of local politics. People only care about the big elections, again, because they're exciting. Those are ideologies. How many people vote in local elections? A massive amount less than in the actual large, exciting elections. And the sad thing is that the small elections are the ones where things can actually get done. So, finally, I don't have time to get into the idea of alienation, but I think we've all heard of Marx. We've all heard the idea that the worker is being taken advantage of. We've heard that people are reduced to their labor, they're reduced to their money, they're reduced to all these things, and they're no longer individuals. So I want to close with a quote from Theodore Adorno, and it's this triumph of advertising and the culture industry is the compulsive imitation by the consumer of cultural commodities, which at the same time they recognize as false. So the only way we're going to break out of this culture industry, this mass institution of society as numbers, statistics, and pictures and not people, is to wake up the individual and return to individualism as the sole and main principle guiding value of America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. If you'll allow me some time beforehand just to close the debate by thanking Bart for hosting West Point here. Dean Becker, thank you very much. Ruth, David, Professor Berkowitz. To all the BARD students in the greater BARD community, this is the second year that I've been here doing this, and it is a pleasure to come up here and engage the community in this conversation. The second time that I've been able to bring a group of cadets away, and any time away from the United States Military Academy is surely a treat, so thank you very much for having us here. We look forward to this, and thank you for putting on such a great program. I apparently have also done a fantastic job of scaring my cadets with the video camera, which is why they have provided you such a disclaimer as why this academic public event does not actually represent the views of the United States Military Academy, the United States Army, or the federal government, but it is a great pleasure and treat for us to be ambassadors of our institution while we're here and to show you and demonstrate for ourselves and others that we do believe in intellectual pluralism, and the United States Military Academy wants to be part of the greater academic discourse that's happening across college campuses throughout the country. So, sir, thank you very much for allowing me to do that without taking away my time. I do want to think. Is that it? Am I done? See, us in the Army are trying to all be individuals by saying we don't represent this great big organization that the big green machine has been. I really want to bring together everything that we've talked about in the debate and frame it in a very simple question that I'm not sure we've provided you, the audience, a great answer to, but I'll hope to do that. Are countries people too? And when we think about individualism and the individualistic nature of our behavior, are we not talking about just the self, all of us here, or are we talking about America as a country? Why do we continue to personify America, or any other state for that matter, as an individual, unless it is to simplify our understanding of foreigners, give life to a political organization that is actually fundamentally predicated on a collective society? And I want to answer some of these questions brought up by the affirmative, specifically about the role of freedom in religion, and de Tocqueville's eloquent use of freedom as being a way to have self-government. But that individual nature of self-government isn't tied to our foreign policy. It becomes problematic when we try to envision ourselves as part of a global community greater than simply the United States of America. And where there lacks a global democratic order, I think the philosopher we should turn to is Thomas Hobbes. He's a much better person for understanding the individualistic doctrine that the United States takes to the global community. This allows the United States to continue to act unilaterally in the military world. It allows the United States to embody a culture of treaty exemption, and it is the notion that America can test and deploy nuclear weapons while the rest of the world simply should not. All of these represent Thomas Hobbes' anarchic, self-help world, where countries are characterized by relative gains and the constant quest for power. It is this individual nation that is eternally competing with others that allows Hobbes to explain what that international environment would be like. It would be poor, solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. And unfortunately, that's some of the world that we live in today because of that individualist nature. Let me talk specifically about Arendt's reference of jingoism, and then the last great philosophical development about the role of Jewish Marxism and what we're doing. And I want to share with you two quotes and see if you can help me understand the difference between these two individuals who have led groups and therefore try to aspire the United States to action. One an American and one not an American. The far-reaching, the boundless, the future will be the era of our individual greatness. It is magnificent domain in space and time. The nation of many nations is destined to manifest to mankind the excellence of divine principles, to establish on earth the noblest temple ever dedicated to the worship of the Most High, the sacred and the true, comprising hundreds of happy millions, calling, owning no man master, but governed by God's natural and moral law of equality, the law of peace and goodwill among men. Excellent, fantastic rhetoric. And to compare and contrast this to what we call the world, to the religion of unification of God, sincerity, best of righteousness, mercy, honor, purity, and piety. It's the religion of showing to others, establishing justice, granting their rights, and defending the oppressed and persecuted. The religion of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil with the hand, tongue, and heart. The religion of fighting the way of God with the religion of unity and agreement for total equality between all people without regarding their color, sex, or language. Again, the Tocqueville individualism and freedom. The first quote from John O'Sullivan, writing to help spur manifest destiny and convince Congress to support continuing expansion westward. The second, Osama bin Laden's message to America after September 11th. I ask you, why do we continue to fall in love with our own rhetoric, but reject all others who espouse the same values of an individualistic nature? Undoubtedly, the society that we talk of is comprised of individuals, and that those individuals come together within themselves for good reason. But it is this post-patriotic, post-familial, post-affiliated society that concerns me. It worries me the most because America is becoming both increasingly unilateral and increasingly disconnected from any sense of global community. Today, too often, domestic political discourse glorifies unilateralism and dissociation with any concept of being a global citizen under the guise of American exceptionalism. I have no doubt in America's greatness. In fact, I serve my country precisely because I believe it is great. But I don't have a blind faith that somehow American individualistic behavior in the world makes America great just by the virtue of our existence. I reject the notion that history has an indisputable purpose to serve America. I reject the notion that the U.S. has always embodied freedom and will always embody freedom without an informed and engaged public. I reject the notion that the United States is an exceptional power and it has exceptional wealth to create a rules-based international order that applied in every organization on earth except for the one and only U.S. of A. Such hypocrisy undercuts America's ability to promote its values. Such double standards allow the United States to find itself either co-opted or condoning other countries with human rights abuses, and the perception that the U.S. applies one standard to the world and one other to itself sharply weakens America's claim to lead globally through moral authority, all under the guise of individualism. I actually witnessed this firsthand, serving with America's men and women in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And when we arrived with our helicopters and our machines, and we went to small villages that had never seen electricity or didn't know what running water was, we watched the women of the village walk 6 kilometers to a well, carry water on their heads, in their arms, on their hands, and walk 6 kilometers back. A full day's worth of work. And we knew by our individualistic nature how we could fix the problem, how we could pull ourselves up from our bootstraps, and we said, let's dig a well and build one for you right here so you don't have to travel to get your water. Well, we did that, and 30 days later we came back, and this time I came with a female, so my interpreters and the woman could speak to the women of the village. And they said it was the worst thing that ever happened to them. Why? The only time that they got to be together as women in their community was when they left the men, left that village, and got to spend all day talking about the village's issues, how they could be part of a community. And the fact that we cared about each individual woman's sacrifice of having to pick up and carry that water and how difficult that was on the individual we miss the greater notion and the greater story of how their community was best served by being together and not supporting their own individualist goals. Please allow me to conclude that I think in our future our greatest challenge may not come from other individual nations. Instead, we must concern ourselves with disease, human trafficking, drugs, transnational crime, and cyber warfare. These problems transcend geography, political borders, and the antiquated and dangerous concept of nation-state individualism. Thank you very much.
Before we move to the question and answer period, where you can all post questions, we will revisit our vote. So if you voted before, if you came in late, I don't think you should vote right now. So if you were here at the beginning and heard most of the speeches, you can vote. So those in favor of the resolution, siding with the affirmative, that individualism is an American value worth fighting for, please raise your hands.
Well, 24.
Those opposing the resolution that individualism is an American value worth fighting for. Okay, so we have shifted. We've gone from 32 yay, 20 and 27 nay to 24 yay and 29 yay, nay. So, in other words, 29 people think that individualism is not an American value worth fighting for, whereas only 24 think it is. So there's been a shift in the debate, and I guess that means the negative can go home and claim victory, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're right, which is why we have the question and answer period. So those people who have questions for any of the panelists, please raise. Do we have a mobile mic? No, so you can just raise your hand and speak loudly. I have a question, since no one's raised their hand yet, I think, which is, for the affirmative team, I study the Soviet Union and Russia, and I'm wondering that there was a reference to Marx, but I'm wondering why there wasn't any, I'm a comparative politics person, so I'm wondering why there wasn't any comparison to any countries outside of there was, I think on this side there was talk about France and Britain as comparison, but on this side there were no comparisons to other countries who have attempted to oppose a collective mentality. So I'm curious if you thought about that, or what your view might be on that.
I think it's because America is just so extraordinarily exceptional that no country compares.
Yes.
What about nations like Scandinavia, where they really have a strong emphasis on the society as a whole, but rank much higher on things like individual freedom and overall welfare and so on and so forth?
Is this question for me?
Either side.
Either side.
They take very large care of their individuals. So if you look at their prison systems and things like that, they take into account the human story of every person. They don't just view people as statistics. They don't want an aggregate better outcome. Their society tends more to focus on recognize the value of individual education, of community members' involvement. So I think the problem is that both sides kind of agree that you need a community of better involved individuals and things like that. So I think that those places are both very community-centered, but they're also the community cares about their individuals.
There's a lot to say about it. Scandinavia's are interesting cases. I mean, first of all, it's hard to compare them to the United States. They're incredibly homogenous countries with largely, people who have similar language, similar backgrounds, similar histories, and you just don't have the kind of history of different cultural groups and different religions and different backgrounds that we have. From a welfare point of view, they have a much more vibrant welfare state than we do. do, a lot of them are being dismantled at this moment, and part of the reason is they've been hard to sustain. But you could actually, one of the interesting things is the difference between the United States and Europe generally on issues like welfare and issues like religion and issues like income and mobility are all diminishing, right? 20 or 30 years ago, this is really amazing what's happened in 30 years. 30 years ago, there were extraordinary differences. The United States is a much more religious country than any country in Europe. Today, more people say that they're religious in a number of European countries than the United States. The very rapid deterioration of religious belief in the United States in the last 30 years has been unprecedented. Income mobility in the United States was much higher than in Europe for a long time. And in the recent 2 decades, that has shifted, at least according to some studies. So, and also welfare, Europeans have a much more vibrant welfare system in the United States. The amount we spend on welfare is now per capita, it depends how you count it, is starting to approach many European countries. So the differences, which were quite pronounced for a long time, are being diminished in certain ways. And so one has to, they're complicated questions that look at each country.
Yes.
To be affirmative, it sounds like a lot of the problems facing America, like income inequality, racial inequality, gender inequality, are caused or at least fueled by the lack of individualism. So do you think that individualism is no longer a dominant trend in America, or was it ever really, and what time was that, and in what areas?
Yeah, as far as whether American individualism has declined over recent years, I think certainly in the last speech, the kind of like mass marginalization of society through things like digital media and stuff like that could impede that. But I don't know. I think there's been, as Theo was trying to make in his speech, progress towards, ensuring that there's, whether it's through Supreme Court decisions or things like that those individual rights and those legal protections are increasingly extended. So even if we have a cultural shift towards a less individualistic culture, hopefully we're still moving in a better direction as far as protection for minority groups and things like that.
Yes.
So just I want to ask on the point of sort of Western expansion and stuff like that. It seems like looking at these societies that were like Nazi Germany and the Persian Empire, you have societies that are not individualistic but are still incredibly expansionist. So what is it, let's say in the American example, wouldn't America just expand anyway, whether or not it was an individualistic or non-individualistic society? And expansion in and of itself is a temptation and a problem in and of itself. So what actually is integral to, why is individualism integral to expansion?
Okay, so this is a very good question, and these rationalities behind expansionism for the United States are often thought of in response to the United States' own legacy as a colonial possession, that they need to make this distinction on that basis that they're going into this country and expanding because they're going to help them in terms of upholding this idea of self-determination. And this happened in Cuba, in the DR, in Haiti, in Mexico, and all over Central America, where the United States used this as a justification.
If I may continue on a similar refrain as my speech, I think the unique perspective is that each country viewed itself in a personified manner as individualistic, and the more we focus on individualism as a trait that is just connected to the democratic polity of the internal nation state and not its relationship to other states in the world, we will not be able to really fully appreciate why, whether it's a Nazi Germany society, a Soviet communist society, a totalitarian Chinese society, or a democratic United States, the role in which the country views itself as an individual nation is through a paradigm of an anarchic self-help international environment where I can only really truly rely on myself. I can have some other alliances and things to help me gain relative power vis-a-vis another individual in this global community. But that's why I think individualism is the linchpin, because taken from an international perspective, country A, B, and C all see themselves as individuals competing for finite resources, a finite amount of power, and increased influence over others. So any role of a hegemon or an emerging or revisionist power is going to rival the status quo person running the world order, and perhaps that is the centerpiece of individualism from an international perspective.
Thank you.
I think that the issue that people have with, and use Hitler as an example, and also American expansionism, it's not that they expanded like in the first place, but it's the way that they did so. So I think maybe that if we had treated Native Americans as equal partners and actually like tried to buy the land from them for equal prices instead of seeing themselves as this group of people who are just, we're destined to own the entire North American continent, so get out of the way, let's pay you a pittance for this land that you lived on for thousands of years. Like that, I think that's where individualism comes in. Like in the same way, like countries have been fighting over Poland for like 1,000 years, but Hitler's the other one who gets batted at for it because he just busted in there and killed a ton of people and did a lot of really, really bad things. It's the way in which you do it, it's the exceptionalism that you sort of feel about yourself. It's not the actual action, so you have to view this with a certain amount of texture to it, not just at face value.
It's in the back.
I feel like this might be a kind of foolish question, but when we talk about is it worth fighting for, I'm slightly confused as to whether we're talking about fighting for within our own country and our policy inside the United States when it comes to things like welfare, when it comes to our own constitution, or whether we're talking about fighting in terms of our foreign policy, invading other countries and getting involved in the outside world. I feel like there are two different kinds of fighting, and there are two different answers.
Sure, and I think that not everyone, especially of late, rests easy with the parallel between states and individuals, like on the human level. I think there was a sea change of sorts towards the end of the 1990s, following such atrocities such as the Rwandan genocide. Kofi Annan very notably began to forward this new definition of sovereignty, which represented a departure from the Westphalian model that I think Major Scher has highlighted, at least in part, that said that a state is sovereign only insofar as it's able to protect its population and doesn't either neglect them or actively abuse them, which does reduce individualism to the human. Right? If the state is only valid in that it protects the individual from oppression, then there is no separate sovereign individual that I think Major Scher is trying to say. And this is what enabled the UN, which is an institution originally predicated upon like the equal protection of states and like the child of that thought, decolonization, to then forward this policy of responsibly protect, wherein countries could intervene to prevent genocide without regard for sovereignty, because the argument was that sovereignty no longer existed if there was a genocide, for example. The Rwanda was no longer sovereign in April 1994. So I think that's how the affirmative would want it to be framed. Like, this new conception of sovereignty is a lot better than the Westphalian one, and the criticism of the negative sort of falls apart at the point where you endorse this new conception of sovereignty, because the nation that so abuses its people, or rather, nations are no longer individuals, they're simply like methods of protecting the individuals who reside there.
Any questions? Yes, please.
I have a question for the affirmative, particularly Andres, I think. You mentioned our general habit of medicating mental illness, and I was wondering if that wasn't maybe more, so that the person who was mentally ill could get back to work, if that wasn't more in line with the philosophy that the individuals should pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and that maybe the more ideal situation where the illness could be treated because of the cause, not symptoms being treated, wouldn't be fostered better in a welfare state?
My argument wasn't as much a political one of what the specific cause is. This wasn't a worker versus societal argument. It's the general over-rationalization of the individual, that the individual, now that every form of oppression, every mental disorder in any nuance is listed as a specific thing which can be found in a book, pointed at, diagnosed, and said, you have this, we know what to do with this. That's not much of a political argument, and the fundamental problem there is that it doesn't acknowledge again, this is, personally, I'm much more in favor of psychoanalytic theories and psychoanalytic treatments as opposed to immediate drug therapies and things like that, because they actually take into account individual histories, mechanisms, things like that. And I think you can find that, again, my argument was simply that in a society that doesn't reduce individuals to numbers and lines in textbooks, you're more likely to find those kinds of approaches.
Yes.
I was wondering if we could get some clarification of what we're referring to when we speak of individualism. It seems that both sides, in some senses, overlap, and in some senses, they assume some exclusions from the concept. For example, the no side seem to uphold the fact that collective society can still have free individual thinkers, whereas the no side seem kind of to say more or less the opposite. So just some concise kind of definition of individualism from both sides.
Yeah, I mean, there's individualism, as I tried to define it, as Tocqueville defined it, he defined it as in a negative way, right? And what we try to do is take that negative and show how we dealt with it. He said that individualism was a defect. It's not selfishness, and I think so. There's a couple of confusions that have emerged. One is the negative often tried to emerge to say that individualism is kind of selfishness, passion for the self. That's not how Tocqueville understands it. It's not how I understand it. But I think there is a defect, there is a danger in individualism, which is that it is, to use a word I didn't want to use, but bourgeois. It is isolating. It separates you from the collective, from the common world. And individualism, in that sense, makes you care more about yourself and your immediate relations, your family, your job, your particular, world experience than the common good or an idea of justice. The debate really is how to address that deficiency in individualism, right? And as far as I understand it, the negative says, well, therefore we want collectivism. But the problem with collectivism is that it suppresses individuals and can lead to the kind of deeply anti-individualistic actions of tyranny of the majority. But more than that, just everyone agrees the same, as Andreas was saying, the kind of homogeneity of society. The brilliance of Tocqueville's insights, as far as I understand them, and what he considered to be the brilliance or the exceptionalism of America, he used the first one to use the word American as an exceptional country, was that America developed this kind of individualism that, in a sense, cured itself. Because it saw individualism in so much connected to the idea of freedom and self-government, that it, in the name of self-government and individual self-rule and local rule and engaged political action, civic engagement, to use a word that comes out of Tocqueville, it led these individuals to overcome their alienating, sort of isolating bourgeois drives and engage in public life, democratically. So that for Tocqueville, the only way to overcome the sort of dangers of democratic individualism is by, in a sense, intensifying it to be more democratic and more individual in the sense of freedom and self-government. And so that's the traditional American democratic individualist argument. Understanding not selfishness, but the dangers of individualism, but understanding that the only real, safe, meaningful solution to those dangers of individualism is actually individual freedom, which is what we understood individualism to be in America.
So I think the understanding of individualism that the negative was operating off of was essentially seeing oneself as not beholden to the same rules as everybody else, and as inherently exceptional, is destined for somehow like greater things, and not just part of the not part of the group, which is dangerous. Like we said when we talk about various oppressive movements across history. Like obviously you talked about when we move west, when we see ourselves, as maybe Sherry discussed, as this pinnacle of freedom that can do no wrong in the international realm. We see it as individualism as a personal exceptionalism to common rules and norms that otherwise keep the peace and keep bad things from occurring.
If I may just follow up and agree with Will. I think that the individualism versus collectivism debate is perhaps a false dichotomy that we don't want to get into, and the reason why perhaps there was some of that confusion, what we were trying to say was that individualism in and of itself is about a hierarchy of kind of loyalties, and the loyalty to self is paramount, or perhaps the loyalty to something else, being part of a society greater than yourself, being part of a committed team, being part of an organization or a community. And what we tried to characterize was the de Tocqueville explanation of each individual being so committed to themselves somehow becomes egalitarian in a way that in a democratic forum, everyone seeking their own equality kind of eliminates this notion of greatness, because there's no more aristocracy, because everyone can equally kind of come to it of their own accord and participate through this civic engagement. We said that sometimes those passions can be perverted, and in the sense that your loyalty or hierarchy of needs to your own self becomes that defect of selfishness. And in that way, the United States has conducted itself both with its domestic policy of expansion and we argue its foreign policy today in a way that is a loyalty to America that is somehow a religion of infallibility to our own actions.
Final questions? Yes.
You might be the wrong group to ask this, why, but as the United States becomes less white, they will become less individual. Because maybe the white people kind of invented the idea, and America is going to become more tribal as things go on.
I think the opposite. The most individualist groups of Americans historically have been immigrants. They're people who come here hoping to build a life. They come here looking for property rights, as Leo said, looking for to be taken seriously as an individual, to be treated as a free, dignified person. One of the speakers at our conference will be speaking on Friday at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon is, and I'm going to butcher the name, but Annandale-on-Hudson, who's an Indian American author who recently wrote a book called The True American, which I recommend to anybody interested in these issues. And it's about an immigrant from India who comes to the United States, ends up in a middle of Texas, somewhere in Dallas, I think, in Dallas. And after 9/11, is shot by a right-wing zealot who thought he was a Muslim. Of course, he was a Hindu, but didn't know. And what Anand does in this really amazing book is then follow both these characters, the Indian immigrant who's been shot, who then goes through this hell of having huge medical bills and not being able to pay it and in debt, and his fiance breaks up with him, and etc. And on the other side, this right-wing zealot, and talking to them both, they end up becoming friends and having really interesting conversations. But the question, of course, of the book is which one is the true American? And I think you can probably guess what his answer is. But the point is that I think as the country becomes less white, you will see more and more people embrace the kind of true American idea of individualism that this immigrant particularly did. So.
Okay, so I'm actually Hispanic, and I'm a first generation in my family. My mother came here when she was 2 years old. And so I see this increase in immigrants within the United States as perhaps providing a new conception of individualism in terms of being able to have the opportunity to self-determine. I worked a lot with immigrants from Central America, a lot of whom came from very oppressive societies, and they saw the United States as this opportunity that would create a better life for their family, not just in an economic sense, but also in a political sense. And we do see still this very kind of almost xenophobic individualism that comes very much from the core that I discussed in my speech in terms of, you know, I cling to this identity of what it means to be an American. You do not fit that definition. I am more of that kind of individual than you are. But as the society changes, I think we'll see more of that new kind of individualistic viewpoint.
One final question. Sorry. Actually, you have two final questions, so why don't both of you speak, and then whoever wants to answer can answer.
Okay, so this is for the affirmative, largely, and it has to do with, I think, the first and the last stage. So I think Professor Berkowitz does a great job of defining what individualism is, and you talk so much about how it's putting yourself outside of kind of the web of social relations that you have. And like you say, it's very bourgeois in that sense. Yeah, but isn't that exactly what leads to a yearning for community that allows for mass consumption? The mass consumption of advertising that doesn't take your story seriously? Or, I mean, when you talked about it earlier, it's religion. But maybe now it's the mass consumption is in the form of advertising. And because bourgeois allows kind of for that exploitation or mass that exploitation.
Okay, so hold your answer and then final question. Yes, you.
So this is for the affirmative. I know that you make, I heard a claim that disturbed me a little bit. I know that you make a lot of arguments, and I don't mean to soundbite you, but you said that the property rights would have protected Native Americans from European invasion, even though in their culture, property rights clearly weren't necessary. Is this not an illustration of the negative's point that systemic oppression is individualized to spare the oppressor from blame?
Okay, affirmative, you're up.
I know certainly, you know, ironically enough, like at a debate tournament last semester, we certainly read an argument. I think that's probably a head on the true claim things. To a certain extent, certainly Theo can articulate what he was probably, you know, what he was trying to say. But I think that is to a large extent true, right? The idea that, you know, there is a large degree of reconciliation between a culture that's not, you know, not founded upon the individual right of property, culture which is, you know, which does, and that, you know, that is kind of like a, you know, root problem, and certainly it's probably going to be resolved in favor of the one who does have a, you know, culture of property rights at the expense of them.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question and reveals a lot of the tension between our economic norms and those of societies that are not Western in the capital W sense. I think so. The economist cite Hernando de Soto works a lot in Peru and talks about the degree to which awarding poor Peruvians, or at least helping them develop titles for that property which they traditionally understand to be theirs, though perhaps not in the strict sense of the Western, like economic can, allows them to resist more big business corporate entities from sort of sweeping them off the land that they historically lived on. That doesn't necessarily mean that they internalize those land titles and reject their indigenous culture and conceptions of ownership. It just means that when they are forced into that situation by aggressive actors that I do not mean to attempt to excuse, they can speak their language in a way that prevents that aggressive actor from intruding upon that culture, which might not have the same norms of property rights that the West does. So to jump northwest a little bit too, like the example of Native Americans, I don't think the idea that in our courts recognizing that land which Native Americans have historically possessed, right, another idea of ours, necessarily means that Native Americans must reject their culture. It just like affords them a mechanism to resist the unfortunate and unjust aggression of other parties.
Does anyone take a stab at the first question? Yeah.
Oh, yes. That's someone else. Do you want to do it, Andres? I can just want to pull it up to Anyone?
Just for you.
I think you're right that the idea of like the bourgeois individualism does raise the risks of very easy exploitation. They can kind of run amok very easily, which I think is, but that's how a lot of the things that I talk about happen. But I think it also allows for the possibility of more proper realization. We talked about religion and the roles that religion plays in the community. There's a reason I think Heidegger is kind of like one of the main philosophers of a lot of critical theory, because the idea is the philosophies of action and the philosophies of fulfillment via what you do, your sense of relation, your sense of purpose, things like that, which, again, the problem is that one can fall short of that very easily, and one can very easily fall with this kind of pseudo-halfway individualism into a easily corporate, again, narcissistic society, which doesn't allow for the actual fulfillment of full personal roles, full of freedoms, all these fundamentally individually empowering things. And therefore, yes, the balance is difficult and there's a lot of risk, but ultimately it's the only possible way to fully realize a society full of an entirety of individuals.
Yeah, I think I just did a really good job at that. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is these are not easy questions, right? I mean, individualism is, on one level, a kind of isolating of people from a common good. The question, as I think Andres is trying to say, is how do you respond to that, right? If you move towards a kind of collectivism or egalitarianism, and you say we're just going to, since everyone is becoming isolated and becoming bourgeois, we're just going to give everybody goods, and we're going to give them money, and we're going to give them, what they want. Consumer goods, group claims, we're going to treat them, we're going to create utility as the principle of society, so we're going to measure everything and create kind of statistical measures, right? It may be that everybody ends up living very comfortably, right? Which may be what people want. But there's something missing, at least for some people in that, which are being treated as an individual, being treated with rights. And it may be that comfort for the majority requires pain for a small few, and utility will allow that to happen. So the dangers of moving towards that kind of democratic tyranny, kind of social welfare tyranny, are great, and Tocqueville saw them 200 years ago. And he warned us against them. The question is, what can you do to stop it? And his answer was that America developed naturally, because of its history, a solution, which was, in a sense, seeing individuals who were so convinced of their individual rights that they would fight to govern themselves. And they would thus get engaged in politics, get engaged in civic behavior, get engaged in civic action, join in groups together for collective action, so that they didn't depend on a government to come in and tell them what to do, and whether they should have abortions or not have abortions, whether they should pray in school or not pray in school, or whether they should eat Wheaties or not eat Wheaties, right? They would make those decisions themselves, collectively acting. And that kind of belief in the power of individual action together with others, which is what Tocqueville understood democracy in America to be, was in his mind the only reliable protection of freedom in an individualist age. I can talk about it. That's...
Well, I want to thank all of our debaters tonight, especially the cadets and Major Sheriff coming up from West Point. It's been a very enlightening evening, and I want to thank the audience to have so many people stick around so long and pose so many excellent questions. We look forward to the conference, which will be taking place Thursday and Friday. We have the conference brochures here if you want. We look forward to seeing many of you there those days. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, participants.